Christine, I know you're going to make a little introduction.
Thank you, Michael. Roy Scranton is an Iraq War veteran who served in the U.S. military from 2000 to 2006, a scholar, a public intellectual, a Princeton University PhD, and currently a research fellow at the Center for Energy and Environmental Research in the Human Sciences at Rice University. He has published widely on essays and feature articles in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Boston Review, and Book Forum, among many others. His New York Times essay, Learning How to Die in the Anthropocene, was selected for the Best American Science and Nature Writing 2014 and expanded into his recent book, Learning to Die in the Anthropocene, Reflections on the End of a Civilization. Concerned with the urgency of global warming as a decisive issue both for the human species and for the future of the humanities, Scranton's focus situates itself on the intersection of conflict, ethics, culture, and climate change. Now, let's start with the title of the book, Learning to Die in the Anthropocene, Reflections on the End of a Civilization. It sounds grim and depressing, and it is. We live in a carbon-fueled economy, and according to dozens of policy experts and national security officials, in addition to environmental scientists, global climate change is the greatest threat in the United States, more dangerous than terrorism, Chinese hackers, and North Korean nuclear missiles. The Pentagon's 2014 Climate Change Adaptation Roadmap warned, quote, rising global temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, climbing sea levels, and more extreme weather events will intensify the challenges of global instability, hunger, poverty, and conflict. They will likely lead to food and water shortages, pandemic disease, disputes over refugees and resources, and destruction by natural disasters in regions across the globe. The concern is clearly not whether global warming exists or how we might prevent it, but how we are going to adapt to life in a hot, volatile world we've created. This world we call the Anthropocene, this world we leave to our children and grandchildren. And what Scranton makes clear in his book is, in order to learn how to die in the Anthropocene, we must first learn how to live in it. Scranton asserts that, and I'll paraphrase here, in order to adapt to this strange new world, we're going to need more than scientific reports and military policy. We're going to need new ideas, new myths, and new stories, a new conceptual understanding of reality, and a new relationship to the deep polyglot traditions of human culture that carbon-based capitalism has vitiated through commodification and assimilation. We need a new vision of who we are and a new humanism, a new philosophical humanism. The conceptual and existential problems that the Anthropocene poses are precisely those that have always been at the heart of humanistic inquiry. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to live? What is truth? What is good? What does life mean in the face of mass death or collapse of the collapse of global civilization? How do we make meaningful decisions in the shadow of our inevitable end? These questions that Scranton poses leave me wondering about the possible roles that art and the ideas in the works of art might play in rethinking how we approach this philosophical age, how we learn to live and die as a civilization. As a curator, I have always believed that art can interrupt truisms, offer us alternative interpretations or confrontations of the truth, most often without answers, but merely platforms or proposals, poetic proposals, sometimes fractured, confounding, or opaque proposals. By inviting Roy Scranton here to LACMA tonight to respond to the works of art in Diana Thader, The Sympathetic Imagination, in part reflects my own questions about who and what he calls the humanist thinker, the one who is willing to stop and ask the troublesome questions, the one who is willing to interrupt, the one who resonates on other channels with slower, deeper rhythms. One of the proposals that both Scranton and Thader investigate is found in the complex universe of honeybees. In his third chapter on carbon politics, Scranton looks at how the honeybee colony sends out waves upon waves of scouts to search for a new hive when it needs to find a new home. Communicating by dancing, these advanced individuals return to the hive and dance their findings from different trees, sites, and journeys, illustrating a variety of visions of a possible future. And like that, a decision is made for the colony. With vibration, energy, and honey production at the center of their structure, so are human societies, structured around labor, horses, wheat, coal, oil, etc. How we harvest, produce, organize, and distribute energy determines our power flow and structure. While protest politics and outrage may send signals to the ruling elites, the power remains in the hands of those who produce, not those who only consume. In Thader's installation, Knots and Surfaces, 2001, which is the first work a viewer confronts in part one of the Sympathetic Imagination in the Art of the Americas building, 5 large-scale projections of honeybees, numbers, and hexagons illustrate a mathematical hypothesis that correlates a 6-dimensional spatial model to the map of a honeybee's dance. Working as she does with animals and insects that exist both as individuals as well as a complex social network functioning as a unit, Thader uses the separate images to form a single picture. But when the viewer enters into the installation, he or she penetrates that space, and the broken picture reflects a vision of chaos. It seems that this immersive experience for the viewer, human viewer, that rearranges subjectivities, this dramatically scaled, multidimensional display, these colors, maps, metrics, and chaotic visuals lead me to consider Scranton's call for the humanist thinker. Again, the one who is willing to stop and ask the troublesome questions, the one who is willing to interrupt, the one who resonates on other channels with the slower, deeper rhythms. As after consideration of these structures, we can understand how the enemy isn't out there somewhere. The enemy is ourselves, not as individuals, but as a collective, a system, a hive. So without further ado, Roy Scranton. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Christine, for that wonderful introduction. I also want to thank Diana, Christine, Michael, LACMA for inviting me here today to participate in this conversation. It's a privilege to be invited to as I just said, participate in the conversation with Diana's work, and it's a real pleasure. It's a real pleasure to think along with and in response to Diana's work and a set of questions that resonate deeply with both of us. Questions around the sympathetic imagination, space, representations, form, and thinking the non-human. As you can tell from the subtitle to this talk, the thinking that I'm going to be doing today is something on an angle to Diana's work. So it's the geological imagination. And as you might guess or infer from the title, I'm thinking about issues of circulation, practice, process, fragment, and fracture. Rock, paper, scissors. This response to Diana's work is less an intervention than an interruption, a suspension of more conventional forms of meaning-making to try to open up new ways of making meaning. So I'll just begin. Rock, paper, scissors. 1. Rock. In the beginning was rock, and out of rock came rock. The beginning was rock, slow, light, light, sinking into rock, heat, and the beginning was rock, and out of rock came rock. A rock slowly spinning in space, heat. Where you burn, a rock makes life, hydrogen to helium to carbon and back again. from hydrogen to oxygen, silicon, aluminum, iron, calcium, sodium, potassium, rocks accumulating cool molecules, slow light, burning across long eons. In the beginning there was rock, and rock was rock, and out of rock came rock. The beginning was rock in the beginning, rock weeping water, rock and water fusing sky out of space, rock bleeding fire, rock forging chains, molecule to molecule. And God was rock in the beginning, and rock is dead, and space is dead, and light is dead, and life is dead. Life, rock, and water, God, dead, and living only a form of the dead, and a very rare form at that. Dead light, dead heat, dead rock, dead space, dead rock, dead God, and God was dead in the beginning, was rock, light, space. The motivating enigma of the Anthropocene is the human as echinus, geological agent, mortal flesh as immortal rock. Over eons, starfish and sea urchin skeletons recompose into limestone, just like Stegosaurus recomposes into Brent crude, becoming earth, becoming geology. We've not only joined the ranks of such geoforms, but surpassed them. When the human species was only a crafty primate, and there were perhaps as many as 15 million of us roaming all across the planet, before the invention of agriculture, we were no more geological than the spiny anteater or hedgehog. Today, the human is more than rock, more than oil. The human is a geological agent, a forcing, a carbon monster, a breaker of ice ages, a plastic and methane and macadam, a species transforming even how rocks come to be, which is to say the planet's very geology. A great power, tyrant, primate, or at least that's how we might like to think of ourselves. The truth is more troubling, since what the Anthropocene means is that we act at strata beyond which we can consciously or rationally conceptualize agency. We act beyond individual beings, beyond collectives, beyond species and spaces. We act as planetary function. The forms of life understood in the Western tradition, the Greek bios, physical life, psyche, the life of the soul, and zoe, spiritual life, are insufficient to comprehend our existence as geos, as rock, as earth. The idea of the Anthropocene, as more and more people understand the concept today, poses the possibility that the earth has entered a new geological epoch, one characterized by the advent of the human species as a geological force. At some point in the past, perhaps the Industrial Revolution, maybe 1784, perhaps July 16th, 1945, maybe 1610, the human species began to shape the geological processes of the Earth so profoundly that we have inadvertently shifted the carbon cycles of warming and heating caused by the planet's orbit around the sun, and will continue to do so for 100,000 years or more, in ways that will be readable in the geological record millions of years in the future. No one intended this, and we seem to be incapable of preventing it. This is the deep meaning of the Anthropocene, a meaning we can usually only look at in flashes, peeking between our fingers a moment or two at a time. For all our hubris and invention, we remain locked within the crude determinism of matter. In the end, the human is no more than a rock. 2. Gilgamesh. The Anthropocene is a synonym for climate change, but it transforms the idea of climate change from an event, something that will happen in the future, something distant, something we can avoid or think our way out of, to a time period, a geological epoch in which we find ourselves already thrown. The Anthropocene is a post-climate change world, the world we live in today. There's no escaping it. The Anthropocene is an apocalypse, but an apocalypse that's already happened, that is already happening, though not all at once and not all in the same way. Perhaps, as some scientists argue, the Anthropocene apocalypse was born in the New World apocalypse of the 16th and 17th centuries, when European-born disease and war wiped out as much as 95% of the indigenous population of the Americas. Perhaps it was born in the apocalypse of the two world wars, the conflagration that swept from Armenia, Poland, and Belarusia to China, Korea, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. Today you can see it flickering across Syria and Iraq, Indonesia, Ukraine, and Palestine. But the apocalypses of the Anthropocene will not only comprise human massacre, disease, state collapse, and genocide, they will also arise out of deliberate decisions by state and corporate actors to sacrifice entire regions to capital and security. These sacrifice zones will be abandoned to decay and toxification with little hope of recovery. In Alberta, Canada, tailings ponds have been created to store wastewater from the extraction of oil from the Alberta tar sands. These open ponds, spread across more than 43,000 acres of boreal forest, now hold more than 200 billion gallons of toxic sludge, leaking naphthenic acids, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, phenolic compounds, ammonia, and mercury into the ground, occasionally spilling out into rivers and watersheds. In Baotou, the largest industrial city in the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region of northern China, a toxic lake spreads from the outskirts of the Baogang steel and rare earth complex, one of the world's biggest suppliers of the rare earth minerals necessary for our microelectronic wireless lifestyle. The West has always had its sacrifice zones, of course, but in the past it called them wilderness. The hinterlands, the untillable scree, the deserts, the land of the Apache or the Crow. In 1901, during the Philippine-American War, General Jacob H. Smith was ordered to take his men to Samar in response to an attack by villagers and guerrillas in the town of Balingaga, an attack that killed 48 American soldiers. Smith ordered his men to butcher everyone over 10 years old. "I want no prisoners," he said. "I wish you to kill and burn. The more you kill and burn, the better it will please me. The interior of Samar must be made a howling wilderness." Cancer Alley, Garbage Gyre, Sudan, Chernobyl. 3. China. No wolf howls alone in the wilderness. Every human is a biome. Just so, every predator is its prey, every enemy its own enemy. Every wolf is a deer, every deer a human. Every American is Chinese. Every human is carbon, oxygen, electricity, and hydrogen. Every line is space. The greatest peril in life lies in the fact that human food consists entirely of souls. An Inuk named Ivaluardjuk told Danish anthropologist Knud Rasmussen a century ago. All the creatures that we have to kill and eat, all those that we have to strike down and destroy to make clothes for ourselves, have souls, like we have, souls that do not perish with the body, but which must therefore be propitiated, lest they should revenge themselves upon us. Part 4, Gilgamesh. It was the king of Uruk's right to take a bride's virginity on her wedding night. This was the king's right. Gilgamesh insisted on his right, and no man could stop him, since no man was as mighty as Gilgamesh. So the men and women prayed to the gods, and the gods made a wild man, Enkidu, who ran with the deer. Enkidu and Gilgamesh met on the streets of Uruk and fought all day, all night, without cease, without victory. The sun set, and they fought in the dark, shaking the stone walls of Uruk. When dawn came, they made peace, kissing like brothers. They killed Humbaba, the ogre of Lebanon, and they killed the bull of heaven. Then the gods struck down Enkidu with sickness, taking his life in the night. Gilgamesh wept and cursed and fled Uruk, wandering in grief, searching out the last man, Utanapishti, the immortal. When Gilgamesh found him, Utanapishti told the king how, before the deluge, he had been ordered by the gods to build a great boat to carry the beasts of the field, the creatures of the wild, and members of every skill and craft. One day, as the gods foretold, the rain began to fall. For a day, the gale winds flattened the country. Quickly they blew, and then came the deluge. Like a battle, the cataclysm passed over the people. For 6 days and 7 nights, there blew the wind, the downpour, the gale, the deluge. It flattened the land. Once the waters receded, the gods made Utanapishti and his wife immortal. Utanapishti told Gilgamesh that he too could be immortal if he could go 6 days and 7 nights without sleeping. The first night, Gilgamesh struggled to stay awake for hours, but then he fell asleep for the whole week. When Utanapishti roused him, Gilgamesh cursed the futility of existence. "For whom, Urshanabi, toiled my arms so hard," he wailed. "For whom ran dry the blood of my heart?" There would be no immortality for Gilgamesh. save for what he could make with the stones he dug from the earth, save for the songs told of him and written in stone on paper. Gilgamesh tore stone from the bowels of the earth and built a tower into the sky, a tower of carbon, a great monument that reached the very sun. Then Gilgamesh climbed the tower and brought down the sun to Uruk, pouring its power into his Chevy Impala. He drove that Impala all over Uruk, wind blowing in his hair, remembering Enkidu. Let us sing to each other of Gilgamesh, mightiest of all men, the one who saw what was secret, discovered what was hidden, who brought back a tale of before the deluge. 5. Chernobyl. I could keep an eye on the weather, Lord in heaven, subjectivization of modern science, the human gift of his genes. There is no question he was aware in the present moment of itself in the present moment. Biting his lips, he plunged his militarism into the popular context of her Marxism-Leninism, bristling breath into steam. Broke radio silence. Why would flocks separate, some in small groups, others flying, boredom utopic with waking life? By integrate, we mean to arc into a space without surface, as if it were an inhabitable, flickering, stereoscopic gallantry, the everlasting universe of things. She's filled with images of grain. Labor is, therefore, the objectification of man's species life, for language is, in fact, employed as the instrument of communication, probably some hard-pressed passions and medieval sins, meaning pay attention, meaning the thing at hand. The crucial thing, as the return of poetry to its bardic roots. The acid can easily get out of control, as it clearly did. We look for communion, meet unkempt Americans in a Soho restaurant, and chant together of dead and forgotten things.